Friends, now coming to Indian Councils Act 1861. Indian Councils Act 1861. So let's see what are the important features of this act. So I said when I'm discussing 1833 just 5 minutes ago, I said 1833 it reached the heights of centralization. Okay, so the decentralization process has started from Indian Council Act 1861. It reversed the first point. It reversed the centralizing tendency and initiated a policy of decentralization. Okay, and restored the legislative powers of Bombay and Madras presidencies. Once again, it reversed the centralizing tendency and initiated the policy of decentralization and restored the legislative powers of Bombay and Madras presidencies. Whereas in 1833, Charter Act of 1833, the Governor General of India has given the exclusive legislative powers, and the legislative powers of Bombay and Madras presidencies was deprived. So it was restored in Indian Council Act 1861. Next one, beginning of representative institutions by involving Indians in law making process. Whereas when we are discussing 1853, it heralded the beginning of providing local representation, whereas it provided representative institutions by involving Indians. It is clearly mentioning involving Indians. Whereas 1853 talks about, Charter Act of 1853 talks about providing local representation in the Legislative Council. Whereas it talks about, 1861 talks about institutions, representative institutions involving Indians in law making process. In this record, the Viceroy has nominated Raja of Benares, Maharaja of Patiala, Raja of Benares, Maharaja of Patiala and Sir Dinkar Rao. Okay, these three members, Raja of Benares, Maharaja of Patiala and Sir Dinkar Rao, were nominated to the Legislative Council. So focus the keyword representative institutions. Next, the important thing, now Viceroy can issue ordinance. Hope all of you know ordinance, the temporary legislations. Okay, so the Viceroy can issue ordinance without the concurrence of Legislative Council. Without the concurrence of Legislative Council during emergency. Okay, sorry, the word missed. During emergency, life of such ordinance is 6 months. Okay, Viceroy can issue ordinance without the concurrence of Legislative Council during emergency, and the life of such ordinance will be 6 months. Okay, and next, most important thing, the portfolio system was introduced, where the member of Viceroy Council was made in charge of one or other department. What is portfolio system, sir? Divisioning of powers, like Home Ministry, Amit Shah. Okay, so HRD Ministry and all these things, different ministries, they were made responsible for each department. This is known as portfolio system. So these are the two important things which we are following till now. The ordinance system, most of the things, the legislative system also we are following. Yes, so Viceroy can issue ordinance and the portfolio system. Okay, the keywords are decentralization, representative institutions, Viceroy can issue ordinance and the portfolio system. So remember, drop. Decentralization, representative institutions by involving Indians, Raja of Benares, Maharaja of Patiala and Sir Dinkar Rao. And Viceroy can issue ordinance now and the portfolio system. And next, coming to the Indian Councils Act 1892. Indian Councils Act 1892. So what are the important provisions, sir? It increased the functions of Legislative Council. My dear friends, a quick question. When for the first time there is a clear separation of powers between Legislative Council and Executive Council. When there is a clear separation of powers of Legislative Council and Executive Council, when it was made? It was made in 1853. Now slowly the powers of Legislative Council were being gradually increasing. Okay. So it increased the functions of Legislative Council and gave them the power of discussing budget. Please focus on the word discussing. They have just given the power of discussing budget and to address the questions to executive. It gave the endowed the Legislative Council with the power to discuss the budget. Okay. So the budget is the keyword for us. So please remember budget. Next one. Additional number of non-official members in central and provincial legislative councils were added, but it retained the official majority. Who are non-official members, sir? Who are not employed by the British government. If they are employed by the British government, if they are the servants of the British government, then they are considered as an official majority. Non-official members are the members who are not employed by the British government, the outsiders. Okay. So additional number of non-official members in both Central Legislative Council and the Provincial Legislative Council were added, but it retained the official majority. But still the officials are enjoying the majority. Next one. The most important thing. Provision of indirect elections. Provision of indirect elections through nomination of members at Central Legislative Council and Provincial Legislative Council. The most important thing, sir. For the first time you are hearing the word elections here in the British legislations. Okay. So 1892 introduced the element of elections for the first time. However, please remember these are indirect elections. So indirect elections are done by nomination of members. Indirect elections through nomination of members at both Central Legislative Council and the Provincial Legislative Council. So please remember it as ban. Okay. So power to discuss budget, additional members of additional non-official members, and N for indirect. Whereas here drop, that is decentralization, representative institutions. Next O for ordinance. Next, Indian Council Act 1909. Indian Council Act 1909. Yes, sir. What are the important provisions of this Indian Council Act 1909? The important provisions of this Indian Council Act 1909. This is also known as Morley-Minto reforms. Who is Morley, sir, and who is Minto? Is Minto the Viceroy or the Secretary of State? Morley is the Secretary of the State and Minto is the Viceroy. Okay. The most dangerous thing it introduced the concept of separate electorate through communal representation. It introduced the concept of separate electorate through communal representation. So the separate electorate initially was introduced for Muslims. That is, Muslim members were elected only by the Muslim. Muslim members elect only Muslim leaders. Okay, just make a correction. Muslim leaders will be elected only by the Muslim population. Okay, it means that just make a correction that one. Okay, it introduced the concept of separate electorate through communal representation. Next, that's the reason we call Minto as the father of communal electorate. Since in 1909 the communal electorate, the separate electorate was introduced, that's the reason Minto is known as father of communal electorate. This all highlights the divide and rule policies of the British government. Next one. Association of Indians for the first time with Viceroy's Executive Council. Association of Indians for the first time with Viceroy's Executive Council. Once again, Association of Indians for the first time with Viceroy's Executive Council and Governor's Council. The most important thing, earlier Maharaja of Benares and Sir Dinkar Rao, all these are two Legislative Council. For the first time, this one Association of Indians with the Viceroy's Executive Council. Please remember, don't confuse. In 1861 Indian Council Act, it is Association of Indians with the Legislative Council, whereas 1909 Association of Indians with the Viceroy's Executive Council. So who is the first member, sir? Satyendra Prasad Sinha. Satyendra Prasad Sinha is the first Indian to join Viceroy's Executive Council. Once again, I am repeating. Satyendra Prasad Sinha became first Indian to join Viceroy's Executive Council, and he was appointed as a law member. My dear friends, there are three important personalities, okay, which most of the times most of the students confuse between these three. Okay, please remember, Satyendra Prasad Sinha is the first Indian to get associated with the Viceroy's Executive Council, and don't confuse, Satyendra Nath Tagore is the first Indian civil servant. Okay, and there is other one, Sachidanand Sinha. Who is Sachidanand Sinha, sir? He chaired the first session of the Constituent Assembly. So don't confuse between these three names, as these are close. Most of the time students confuse. Satyendra Nath Tagore, Indian civil servant; Satyendra Prasad Sinha, Viceroy's Executive Council; and Sachidanand Sinha, first to chair the first Constituent Assembly, first meeting of the Constituent Assembly. Okay, and then the other important functions are, it enlarged and expanded the functions of Legislative Council. It further expanded the functions. That is, members can ask supplementary questions. Members can ask supplementary questions. Now they can move resolutions on budget. They can move resolutions on budget. Whereas in 1892, they can discuss the budget. Now they can move resolutions on budget. Next one is, now the Legislative Council size is increased both at central and state level. The size of the Legislative Council is increased at both central and state level. So the important things we will be remembering here is, first one is communal electorate. Hope everyone will remember this, Satyendra Prasad Sinha. So I haven't included in the mnemonic. Next one, it enlarged the functions of Legislative Council. Next one, Legislative Council size is increased. Okay, CFL. Okay, hope everyone knows that CFL bulbs. Okay, C for communal electorate, F for increased the expanded the functions of Legislative Council, and L for the size of the Legislative Council is increased. Okay, so please remember this: drop, ban, and CFL. Okay, so these are the provisions with regard to the 1861, 1892, and 1909. Let's have a quick recap. You ate grapes and you became sick, and then you did your MTech. MTech in which subjects? Of toilet, in building sophisticated toilets, and then you traveled alone in caves. Okay, now you are protesting to drop ban on CFL bulbs. Okay, to drop ban on CFL bulbs. Please remember this, sir. Okay, most of the students forget this one. Okay, drop ban on CFL bulbs. Just imagine all the CFL bulbs in the market are banned, so you are protesting to drop the ban on them. Okay, so this is for 1861, this is for 1892, and this is for 1909.